Hey, welcome to our presentation on the leading data privacy issues for 2026. My name is Scott, and I am a principal consultant at Executive Technology based here in Florida. Over the next hour, we will cover some of the issues we see in data privacy and how we can help you manage them in 2026. Data privacy has evolved from a compliance exercise into a core strategic, legal, and operation risk management function. Organizations are no longer judged solely on whether policies exist, the checklist method, but on whether the privacy protections are embedded, measurable, and enforceable across data flows, business operations, technology systems, personnel, and processes. The paperwork or patchwork of global and state privacy laws rarely allow, creating uncertainty or at a minimum caution when conducting business across jurisdictions. Understanding where customers are located and which laws apply is now a fundamental business requirement. AI governance and compliance are becoming increasingly important as governments modernize laws to address emerging technologies. Public incidences and regulatory action show that AI risks are already affecting individuals and organizations through bias, data misuse, and lack of transparency. Regulators are aggressively enforcing rules around data collection, retention, and purpose. Businesses must understand where data resides, what and why it is collected, and clearly document why it is retained. Third-party vendors represent a major risk surface. Many high-profile breaches originate with service providers that organizations rely on to deliver their outsourced capabilities. Cybersecurity and privacy must operate in close alignment, and the same is true across all business units. Breaking down silos and integrating privacy principles into enterprise operations is essential for resilience and trust. Transferring data across national or even U.S. state borders adds legal and operational complexity, requiring careful oversight to maintain compliance. Customer data rights must be treated as an operational priority. Data deletion must be as effective and scalable as data collection, as manual data processes are often too slow to meet regulatory deadlines and customer expectations. Automation is preferred there. Sensitivity of biometric data, including fingerprints, facial recognition, voice prints, and behavioral identifiers, now receive heightened protection under many laws. Privacy regulations impose significant financial penalties for each class of violation. Also, the laws allow stacking the fines, which increases the overall amount. Executives must also factor in reputational damage, loss of customer trust, and long-term brand impact into the cost. Organizations now face more than 20 U.S. state privacy laws, with additional laws emerging each year. Alongside GDPR and other global regulations, this growing complexity makes compliance more expensive and increases the risk of inconsistent implementation. Leaders should prioritize building a unified privacy program anchored in established frameworks, such as the NIST privacy framework, rather than reacting to each jurisdiction individually. Privacy and cybersecurity frameworks are complementary, and privacy regulations generally do not mandate a specific framework. However, they expect organizations to adopt a recognized framework and justify their approach, particularly if it differs from common industry practices. Common examples of frameworks include NIST, COBIT, and ISO. Organizations should select a framework that aligns with their industry and risk profile, and then implement it consistently across the enterprise. The consequences of noncompliance are real and increasingly severe. Under EU's GDPR, regulators can impose fines up to 4% of global annual turnover, or $22 million, whichever is higher, and have already done so in high-profile cases. For example, the Irish Data Protection Commission fined Meta $1.4 billion for transferring European user data without adequate safeguards. and TikTok 630 million for unlawfully transferring data to China and failing to provide transparent disclosures. In the United States, state enforcement actions under laws like California Consumer Privacy Act are gaining traction. The California Attorney General secured a $1.2 million settlement with Sephora for failing to disclose data sharing practices and honor opt-out rights. Companies have also faced actions for mishandling student data, mobile app security failures, and breach notification violations. Beyond privacy laws, states are pursuing broader privacy and biometric claims. In 2025, the Texas Attorney General announced that Google would pay $1.4 billion to settle allegations that it collected location, biometric, and other personal data without proper consent, the largest state privacy settlement to date. As organizations determine which laws apply, it is often effective to align global policies with the most protective applicable standard. When legal requirements conflict or remain unclear, organizations typically work with the legal counsel to may default to the most restrictive standard to reduce risk and maintain defensibility. A best practice for global governance is to adopt a single framework across the organization. This standardizes documentations, auditing, and reporting. It simplifies the management of source of truth documents and policies and ensures continuity over time. Policies should be designed with the expectation that they will outlast individuals and must be adaptable as regulations and technologies evolve. Cybersecurity and data privacy should be closely integrated, as they are complementary disciplines. With them aligned, operational efficiency increases and protection gaps are reduced. Financial exposure is significant. As a result, building a strong business case for your privacy and security investment is now more straightforward than ever. AI systems often repurpose personal data in ways that were not anticipated at the time of collection. Many organizations lack clear visibility into how personal data flows into AI models and cannot reliably support deletion or correction requests once that data has been incorporated. This, along with other issues with AI data integration, creates significant compliance gaps. Maintaining a model inventory, establishing an AI governance policy, and conducting data protection impact assessments are essential controls. AI is not new. Foundational research dates back to the 1950s, and machine learning has been embedded in commercial systems for decades. What is new is the rapid adoption of AI and large language models across business functions. AI presents new risk considerations because it is increasingly integrated into core operations. Organizations now use LLMs to query databases, assist with customer support, automate decision support processes, and generate business documentation, reports, and communications. Each of these use cases raises an important governance question. Raises important governance questions, including how data is used, who has access to it, whether it is retained for model training, and how leakage or unauthorized disclosure is prevented. Organizations must also address model reliability risks, including hallucinations, bias, and unintended outputs. Global regulators are moving from principles to binding requirements. The European Union's Artificial Intelligence Act, AI Act, the first comprehensive AI regulatory framework, adopts a risk-based approach, imposing transparency, documentation, and risk management obligations on providers and deployers of AI systems. with more stringent requirements for high-risk usage. The AI Act also aligns with broader data protection principles such as those in GDPR, including automated decision-making rights and data subject protections, and imposes significant penalties for non-compliance and prohibited AI practices, which can end up to costing in fines 7% of global revenue. Examples of prohibited AI practices are harmful manipulation and social scoring. In the United States, while there is no single comprehensive federal AI law yet, regulators are actively applying existing legal authorities to AI practices. The FTC, Federal Trade Commission, has published guidance emphasizing that companies must be transparent and accountable in how they use consumer data in AI models, and that expanding data uses through retroactive or quiet policy changes may be viewed as unfair or deceptive. The FTC has also taken enforcement actions under its Consumer Protection and Data Security Authority, requiring companies to delete products or algorithms developed with unlawfully obtained data, and challenging deceptive AI product claims that misled consumers about how their data is used. These regulatory trends highlight that privacy and AI governance are not abstract concepts. They are enforceable legal obligations. Privacy principles and general data governance require accuracy and integrity of information, a standard that directly affects AI systems, where input quality strongly influences output reliability. Privacy laws also establish rights to data deletion, correction, and access, requiring AI systems to incorporate mechanisms to support these requirements, such as data erasure, updates, and auditability. To maintain compliance and reduce risk, organizations should prioritize data protection impact assessments, comprehensive data mapping, and formal AI governance policies that align with both data privacy and AI regulatory expectations. As with cybersecurity, AI governance and privacy protections are enterprise-wide responsibilities that must be embedded into organizational culture, processes, and technology by design. Most organizations underestimate how many systems, applications, and third-party vendors store personal data. Shadow IT as a service sprawl, and uncontrolled data lakes significantly expand the organization's risk surface. Without a clear understanding of data flows, organizations cannot reliably meet legal and regulatory obligations. Comprehensive data inventories and automated data lineage tools are essential to maintain visibility and control. New initiatives should incorporate privacy and cybersecurity by design from the earliest planning stages. Project teams should include privacy and security stakeholders during requirement gatherings, architectural designs, and implementation planning. Data inventory and mapping have long been persistent challenges, and few organizations have full visibility into their data environments. Many struggle with shadow IT, as a service sprawl, and data distributed across numerous systems and storage locations. Clear policies should define acceptable use, and technical control should enforce those policies. Policies without enforcement mechanisms are rarely effective. Effective data governance initiatives focus on discovering, classifying, inventorying, and organizing enterprise data assets. While organizations are improving, regulatory expectations are accelerating, and data and security laws increasingly require demonstrable data visibility and control. The time to operationalize these efforts is now. Supporting technologies can significantly accelerate this work. Examples of supporting technology are data discovery and classification tools to locate and label sensitive data across endpoints, cloud storage, and databases. Data security posture management solutions to continuously monitor where sensitive data resides and who has access. Data loss prevention technologies to prevent unauthorized data exfiltration. Data catalog and metadata management platforms to maintain centralized inventories and ownership records. Data lineage tools to map how data moves between systems and transforms in those systems. SaaS security posture management and CASB tools to control shadow IT and SaaS sprawl. Privacy management platforms to track processing activities, data subject requests, and DPIAs. Key takeaways: maintain continuous awareness of where systems, assets, and data reside. Understand and document data flows. Accountability extends to the data regardless of location or who is processing it. Implementation policies supported by enforceable technical controls. Use automation and governance tooling to improve compliance, accuracy, and risk reduction. Reduce risk by providing approved sandbox or test environments where teams can experiment within controlled and monitored boundaries. Security protects data from unauthorized access and breaches, while privacy governs how data is lawfully, ethically, and appropriately used. Leaders must ensure these two disciplines are fully integrated, as one cannot be effective without the other. Privacy by design must become a standard requirement in product and system development rather than an afterthought. Security by design has long been a foundational principle in technology development, and privacy by design now carries explicit legal weight under the EU General Data Protection Regulations, known as GDPR. Data protection by design and by default is the statutory obligation. Controllers must implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to embed data protection throughout processing activities, limiting collection, storage, and access to what is necessary for the intended purpose. In addition to GDPR, many jurisdictions incorporate similar expectations. For example, Brazil's LGPD requires privacy-centric safeguards from production concept through operation, emphasizing technical and administrative measures to protect personal data. In the United States, while there's no single federal law that explicitly mandates privacy by design across all sectors, the Federal Trade Commission has long recommended privacy by design as a core principle of fair information practices, including in its Protecting Consumer Privacy in an Era of Rapid Changing framework. The FTC also uses its authority under Section 5 of the FTC Act to take enforcement action when companies make privacy promises they fail to keep or mislead customers about how personal data is used. Emerging AI-specific regulatory regimes further reinforce this integration. For example, the EU Artificial Intelligence Act incorporates documentation, risk assessment, and transparency requirements. Expectations that align closely with privacy by design principles by forcing organizations to embed privacy controls and risk mitigation into high-risk AI systems, including how personal data is processed and protected. Both privacy and security share responsibility for the core principles of confidentiality, access, integrity, accurate information, and availability, accessibility. Privacy focuses on defining how information may be used, who is permitted to access it, and what rights individuals have to control that use. Security focuses on protecting information from unauthorized access, misuse, or malicious attack. In practical terms, privacy defines the rules for responsible data use, and security provides the technical and operational controls to enforce those rules. Privacy and cybersecurity must be integrated by design from the outset of any new initiative. For legal systems, these principles must be incorporated, for legacy systems, these principles must be incorporated throughout modernization, remediation, and risk reduction efforts, both to comply with regulatory expectations and to reduce exposure to enforcement actions and reputation harm. Third-party vendors often represent one of the largest sources of privacy and security risk. Regulators are increasingly holding organizations accountable for the actions of their vendors and service providers, making third-party oversight a core compliance requirement. A robust vendor risk management program, including due diligence, data processing agreements, data protection impact assessments, and ongoing monitoring is critical, particularly when engaging AI vendors or other high-risk service providers. Third parties are organizations to which business functions or services have been outsourced. While operational responsibility may shift, legal accountability does not. Organizations remain responsible for the personal data they collect and process, regardless of whether that data resides or where that data resides or who handles it on their behalf. Effective risk management begins with strong contractual controls. Vendor agreements must impose privacy, security, and compliance obligations that mirror and, where appropriate, exceed the organization's own regulatory requirements. These contracts should address data handling standards, security controls, incident notification timelines, audit rights, and restrictions on subcontracting. Many high-profile data breaches have originated through third-party relationships, including incidences involving retailers, software providers, and managed service provider partners. Events such as Target and Home Depot breaches, as well as supply chain compromises like SolarWinds, demonstrate how vendor weakness can quickly become enterprise-wide crisis. These incidences underscore the need to evaluate supply chain dependencies and third-party integrations as part of enterprise risk management. Vendor risk must be continuously identified, assessed, and mitigated through governance, monitoring, and accountability mechanisms. Why third-party risk is a board-level privacy issue. Most material privacy failures no longer originate inside the enterprise. They occur through vendors, processors, sub-processors, SaaS tools, data brokers, and service providers that touch personal data outside the direct operational control of the organization. Regulators increasingly view third-party risk as a governance failure rather than a technical one. Across jurisdictions, the core regulator expectation is consistent. You can outsource processing, but not accountability. Legal reality. Controllers remain on the hook. 1. Accountability does not transfer under GDPR, LGPD, or any other international framework. An emerging U.S. state laws, data controllers, or businesses under the California Data Privacy Rights Act remain legally responsible for lawful processing, purpose limitation, data minimization, security, and data subject rights fulfillment. Vendors are typically classified as processors, service processors, sub-processors, or increasingly problematic independent controllers. If a vendor misuses data, regulators will first ask, why was the vendor selected? What due diligence was performed? What controls were contractually and operationally enforced? That's important to take note. Key risk domains executives should track. Data use creep. Vendors frequently expand data use beyond the original purpose for product improvements, AI training, analytics, aggregation, or cross-client benchmarking. It's a red flag if any vendor if the vendors do not or cannot clearly and contractually limit data use to your documented processes. Subprocessor sprawl. Modern vendors rely on dozens, sometimes hundreds of subprocessors. Regulatory risk arises when subprocessors are not disclosed or updated. Consent or notice obligations are missed. Data flows cross borders without valid transfer mechanisms. Best practice, treat subprocessor approval as a living governance process, not a checkbox at contract signature. Cross-border transfer exposure. International data transfers remain one of the highest enforcement risk areas. Executives should know where data actually resides and is accessed from, whether SCCs, IDTAs, or equivalent mechanisms are in place, whether transfer impact assessments are realistic or purely formal. Key insight, regulators are increasingly testing whether TIAs reflect actual surveillance and access risk rather than a templated legal language. Security failures are still privacy failures. Security incidences at vendors trigger breach notification obligations, regulatory scrutiny of vendor oversight, contractual disputes, and indemnity battles. Regulators now can expect risk-based security assessments, ongoing monitor, not the one-time questionnaires, alignment between vendor risk tiers, and control rigor. AI and automated processing risk. Vendors increasingly embed AI into customer support, fraud detection, marketing, HR recruitment, and the privacy risks include, or associated with that, undisclosed automated decision-making, inability to explain processing logic, secondary use of personal data for model training. Takeaways, if a vendor uses AI, you should assume elevated DPIA and transparency obligations unless proven otherwise. What regulators expect to see in practice is a risk-based vendor segmentation. Not all vendors are equal. Regulators expect differentiation based on data sensitivity, volume, processing purpose, access level, geographic exposure, and high-risk vendors should receive deeper due diligence, stronger contractual controls, and ongoing reassessments. Contracts that reflect reality. Data processing agreements must match actual data flows, clearly prohibit unauthorized reuse, address subprocessors' controls, include enforceable audit and termination rights. A common failure, beautiful DPAs that don't reflect how the vendor actually operates or data flows move through your organization. Continuous oversight, not annual reviews. Leading authorities now view vendor risk as dynamic. Business model changes. Data use evolves. Vendors and subprocessors quietly move in and out. Static assessments are increasingly seen as insufficient. Keep your policies liquid. Evidence of governance. During investigations, regulators look for documented vendor risk decisions, escalation pathways, executive involvement in high-risk approvals, alignment between privacy, security, procurement, and legal teams. This is less about perfection and more about demonstrable, reasoned control. Strategic takeaways. Third-party risk is no longer a procurement or IT issue. It is an enterprise risk management issue. Regulators punish passive reliance on vendors. Strong contracts without operational oversight provide limited protection. AI-driven vendors materially increase privacy exposure. The question is no longer, did we have a DPA, but did we meaningfully control the risk? Data transfer rules remain one of the most complex global privacy issues. Transfer impact assessment, TIAs, standard contractual clauses, SCCs, and residency requirements influence cloud and architectural decisions. Leadership must align legal, engineering, and product stakeholders around clear transfer strategy. Why data transfers are a board-level issue. Cross-border data transfers are now one of the highest risk areas in privacy compliance. Regulators increasingly view transfers as a sovereignty issue, control over citizens' data, national security issues, foreign government access, and trust issues, consumer and employee expectations. Enforcement actions, regulatory guidance, and court decisions over the past 5 years have fundamentally reshaped what lawful transfer means. Core principle. Core principle is just universal. Across justification for jurisdictions, the same principle applies. Personal data may only be transferred outside a jurisdiction if the destination provides essentially equivalent protection or if enforceable safeguards and accountability mechanisms are in place. We do business globally. We do not consider whether data can move, but under what conditions, controls, and documentation as it moves. This is essential for our business to understand. European framework, the GDPR-centric legal architecture. Under GDPR, international transfers are explicitly restricted unless one of the following applies. Adequacy decision. Transfers are allowed whether the destination country has been formally recognized by the European Commission as providing adequate protection. Key characteristics are country-level assessment of laws, surveillance powers, and remedies, periodic reassessment, and revocable at any time. The executive risk is adequacy can disappear. Think of the Schrems II precedent. Appropriate safeguards, most common in practice. Standard contractual clauses, mandatory for most EU to US and EU to global transfers. Updated clauses require transfer impact assessments, TIA, ongoing monitoring for foreign language legal regimes, suspension of transfers if protections fail. Binding corporate rules. Internal multinational transfer mechanisms, high cost, long approval cycles, regulator scrutiny, signals mature governance to regulators. Derogations, expectations to the requirements, last resort, GDPR Article 49, explicit consent, necessary for contractual performance, important public interest, not scalable, not strategic, regulators strongly discourage routine reliance. Schrems to reality, what executives must understand. Following the Schrems II ruling, contracts alone are insufficient. Organizations must assess foreign government access risks. Encryption, key control, and access limitations are no longer best practices. They are expected. Regulatory expectation. Show us how you prevented unlawful access, not just that you promised to prevent it. United States, it's fragmented coverage and has no federal landscape. Well, it has limited federal landscape, right? We have the FTC and other practices, but no comprehensive federal transfer restrictions. Transfers governed indirectly via the FTC enforcement, sectorial laws like HIPAA, GLBA, and national security considerations. State privacy laws like CCPA and the 20 other states so the states increasingly regulate international transfer indirectly through purpose limitation, data minimization, contractual requirements with processors, risk assessments, for high-risk processing. California's CPRA explicitly references reasonable security safeguards, limiting onward transfers. Contractual accountability. The trend in the United States, we are quietly importing GDPR-style accountability without using the word transfer. Data localization and sovereign laws, high-risk jurisdictions. Several countries now restrict or condition outbound transfers, including China, security assessments, government approvals, and local storage mandates. Russia, mandatory local storage of citizen data. India, sector-based localization and government access provision. Brazil, transfer conditions limited to GDPR, but with evolving enforcement. Our executive implementations, global architecture designed solely around GDPR compliance often fail silently in these jurisdictions. So build your compliance or design your architectures around each local jurisdiction to make sure you're in compliance. Technical safeguards regulators expect. Today, regulators increasingly assess technical reality, not paper compliance. Key expectations, encryption at rest and in transit. EU-controlled or customer-controlled encryption keys. Strict access controls and logging and auditing. Data segmentation and localization by region. Vendors' ability to challenge government access requests. And incident response plans given specific to foreign legal demands. Vendor and cloud risk. Cross-border transfers are often hidden inside vendors, including cloud hosting, SaaS platforms, HR systems, CRMs, and analytical tools are examples. The regulatory stance, you are responsible even if the transfer happens downstream. Executives should ensure transfer mapping is current, SCC flow down to subprocessors. Vendors disclose government access exposures, and TIAs are refreshed after legal or geopolitical changes. Enforcement and liability. Regulators now impose suspension orders, not just fines. Forced repatriation of data. Public reprimands. Contractual invalidation. Fines aside, the business interruption risk is often a real threat. Strategic executive takeaways. Transfer are no longer a legal checkbox. They are a combination of legal, technical, and geopolitical risk. Documentation is defensible. TIAs, architectural diagrams, and decision records matter. Encryption strategy equals compliance strategy. Key control is power. Cloud decisions are privacy decisions. Architectural choices made by IT now carry regulatory consequences. Expect scrutiny, not forgiveness. Regulators assume sophistication at the executive level. Your brand is one of your organization's most valuable assets. Consumers' perception shape expectations, word of mouth reputation, willingness to forgive mistakes, and even the price premium customers are willing to pay. Increasingly, those perceptions are influenced by how well an organization protects personal data and respects privacy. When people think of your brand, do they see a company that safeguards the information, acts responsibility, and operates with transparency and integrity? Privacy is no longer just a compliance or an IT issue. It is a brand issue. Customers are more privacy aware than ever and are increasingly willing to exercise their data and dollar rights. Customers do not want their personal information widely shared, resold, or exposed online. Privacy laws are designed to limit unnecessary data exposure and assign financial consequences to misuse. Organizations that proactively protect data and communicate clearly about their practices strengthen trust and brand loyalty. Regulators are also focusing on manipulative or deceptive user experiences. and practices, often referred to as dark patterns, designs that obscure choices, pressure users into sharing data, or making privacy controls difficult to find, are drawing enforcement's attention. Unclear consent flows, misleading disclosures, and complex privacy settings not only increase regulatory risk but also damage customer trust. When people encounter confusing or deceptive practices, they often question the organization's integrity more broadly. In contrast, human-centric privacy user experience builds confidence and differentiates brands. Clear language, straightforward consent choices, accessible privacy controls, and transparent explanations of data use show respect for users. These practices reduce compliance risk while also improving customers' relationship. Transparency during difficult moments, such as data incidences, further reinforce trust. Customers often judge organizations not only by whether something goes wrong, but how openly and responsible the organization is when it responds. Ultimately, privacy-forward organizations recognize that transparency and user control are not obstacles to growth. They are drivers of long-term brand value. When individuals feel informed, respected, and in control of their data, they are more likely to trust the organization, remain loyal, and advocate for the brand, which is exactly what you want as a business. Legacy data and over-retention. Why yesterday's data is today's liability. Legacy data and over-retention represent one of the largest unpriced risks in modern enterprises. Unlike breaches or transfers, these risks are often invisible, normalized, and culturally entrenched until a regulator, litigant, or attacker exposes them. At a mature privacy program level, the question is no longer, do we retain too much data? It is, why are we still retaining data that no longer serves a defensible business purpose? What we mean by legacy data. Legacy data is not simply old data. It typically has one or more of the following traits. Collected under obsolete legal regimes or notice frameworks. Stored in retired or semi-retired systems. Lacking clear ownership or accountability. Subject to unknown or expired consent. Copied, replicated, and reused without governance. Retained just in case rather than by design. Critically, legacy data often falls outside modern privacy controls, making it both high risk and low visibility. Over-retention, a structural failure, not a policy gap. Most organizations already have retention policies. Over-retention persists because of fear of deletion. Hey, we might need it someday. We all have that box of screws or that junk drawer. Legal hold misunderstanding, poor data mapping, inadequate system deletion capabilities, incentives that reward data accumulation, not minimization. Executives should reconsider. Over-retention is usually a governance and accountability failure, not a lack of legal knowledge. Regulatory exposure. Why this is getting riskier. Core legal principles. Across major regimes, retention must be limited to what is necessary for defined lawful purpose. This principle is embedded in GDPR, storage limitations, CCPA, data minimization, LGPD, purpose limitation, emerging AI governance frameworks, to name some. EU enforcement reality. Under GDPR, regulators increasingly ask, why do you still have this data? Who decided to keep it? Where is the deletion logic enforced? Legacy data that predates GDPR is not grandfathered. If you still need it to process, great, but you must justify it under the current law. U.S. regulatory shifts. While U.S. law historically tolerated overcollection, enforcement is evolving. state privacy laws now explicitly require data minimization. Attorney General's framework over-retention as unfair or deceptive practice. Plaintiffs increasingly allege negligence based on unnecessary retention. Translation, data you don't need but kept becomes a liability at the moment something goes wrong. The litigation multiplier effect. Legacy data significantly increases discovery scope, legal costs, reputational exposure, settlement pressure, and executives often underestimate how every additional year of retained data expands the narrative surface area of a case. Email logs, customer histories, and internal analytics often outlive the business rationale that created them. So keep that in mind, keep that in check. Security implications. From a security perspective, you cannot lose what you don't keep. Attackers target low visibility, poorly governed data sets. Legacy systems often lack modern security controls. Over-retention directly increases breach blast radius, incident response complexity, and notification obligations across jurisdictions. Why deletion is hard? Deletion fails because data is fragmented. Copies and backups, archives, data lakes, analytic platforms, security tools, etc. Systems were not built for erasure, especially older ERP, HR, and CRM systems. No executive ownerships. Retention is everyone's problem and no one's priority. Cultural fear. Deleting data feels irreversible. Risk is perceived asymmetrically. Executive accountability, the turning point. Regulators increasingly expect clear data ownership. Retention rationales tied to business functions. Evidence of active deletion, not aspirational policy. The uncomfortable truth. If no executive can explain why data exists, the organization likely should not have it. That goes with any of the data owners also. What mature organizations are doing differently. Treating data like inventory. You track what you have, you justify why you keep it, you dispose of what no longer serves a purpose. Embedding retention in system design. Automate deletion workflows. Time-based triggers. Legal hold overrides with expiration logic. Shifting the burden of proof. Instead of asking, why should we delete this? Ask, what is the lawful basis to keep this? Aligning privacy, legal, IT, and security. Retention decisions are no longer siloed. They are cross-functional. They're documented, reviewed periodically. It's essential to do that. Strategic executive takeaways. Legacy data is not neutral. It carries legal, security, and reputational risk. Over-retention magnifies every other risk. Breaches, litigation, regulatory scrutiny. Deletion is a leadership decision. It's not an IT task or a privacy policy line. Take ownership. Get it done. Regulators now expect intentional data lifecycles, not passive accumulation. If you can't defend why you have it, you shouldn't keep it. Delete it. Policy alone is not a privacy program. Regulators want evidence of training, governance, metrics, and privacy impact assessments, PIA. Leadership should invest in scalable privacy operations and ensure regular reporting to executives and the board. Operationalizing privacy from a policy to a practical. Most organizations today are privacy aware. Far fewer are privacy operational. Operationalizing privacy means moving from legal interpretation to business execution. Static policies to repeatable processes. Individual expertise, institutional capacity. capability. A mature privacy is not something teams remember to do. Or at maturity, privacy is not something teams remember to do. It is something systems, workflows, and incentives force to happen, make happen. What operationalizing privacy really means. Operationalizing privacy is the discipline of embedding privacy requirements into product designs, data architecture, vendor management, security controls, business workflows, decision-making authority. It answers the executive question, how do we make the right privacy outcome the default and at scale? Why privacy fails in practice. Despite strong legal frameworks, privacy often breaks down because legal and privacy teams sit outside operational decision-making. Requirements are communicated as rules, not workflows. Business teams are asked to consider privacy without tools, and oftentimes without knowledge. Accountability is diffused and informal. Success metrics reward speed and growth, not compliance quality. Executives should recognize privacy failures are rarely caused by ignorance of the law. They are caused by misaligned operating models. Core pillars of privacy operations. Clear decision rights. Operational privacy requires clarity on who approves the new data use, who can accept residual risk, who can block a launch, who owns remediation. Mature organizations eliminate ambiguity by defining privacy sign-off thresholds, aligning approval authority with risk, making escalation paths explicit and clear. Right? Privacy without authority is advisory. Advisory privacy fails under pressure. Remember that. Right? Embedded privacy by design. Privacy cannot be bolted on post-launch. Operational reality includes mandatory privacy reviews at defined SDLC stages, right? Design checklists tied to actual system behavior, default data minimization, purpose limitation enforced in architecture. This is not about slowing innovation. It is about preventing rework, regulatory exposure, and public failure. Data lifecycle integration. Privacy becomes operational when it governs the entire data lifecycle. Collection usage, sharing, storage, retention, deletion. This requires data mapping that reflects reality, not theory. Retention logic built into systems. Deletion that actually propagates across the environment. Legal holds that pause, not break, deletion workflows. And if privacy stops at collection, it is not operational. Vendor and third-party controls. In practice, most personal data risk sits within vendors. Operational privacy requires intake processes that assess vendor data before onboarding. Contractual controls that map to real processing. Outgoing monitoring, not one-at-a-time diligence or checklist. Clear on offboarding the data, return destruction procedures. Executives should assume regulators will treat vendor failures as your failures. Automation where it matters. Manual privacy processes do not scale. Operational programs automate. Operational programs automate data subject requests, intake and fulfillment, retention and deletion, transfer assessments, risk scoring and escalation, and evidence collection for audits. The goal is not to automate for its own sake, but to get consistency, defensibility, and speed. Measuring privacy maturity. Instead of asking, are we compliant, ask how many launches required remediation due to privacy gaps? How often are privacy risks identified after deployment? How long does it take to fulfill a data subject request end to end? Can we demonstrate deletion, not just policy? Can we show regulators how decisions were made? Operational privacy is measurable. If it isn't measurable, it isn't real. Cultural alignment. Even the best frameworks fail without cultural reinforcement. High-performance organizations treat data privacy as a quality signal. Reward teams that surface risk early. Normalize asking, should we, alongside can we? Avoid framing privacy as a legal obstruction. Executives set the tone. When leadership cuts corners, the organization follows. So the C-levels, remember, you're the cultural center of the org. Common anti-patterns to avoid. Privacy teams acting as document reviewers only. One-time DPIAs with no follow-through. Retention policies with no deletion capability. Vendor assessments that never trigger actions. Privacy training disconnected from daily work. These create the illusion of compliance without operational resilience. Strategic executive takeaways. Operational privacy is a business capability, not a legal deliverable. Authority, not awareness, determines outcomes. Privacy must have real decision power. Systems enforce behavior better than policies. Design for compliance. Don't rely on memory. Execution is the new compliance frontier. Regulators increasingly assess how privacy works, not just what you say. If privacy only lives in documents, it does not live at all. Biometrics, location data, and monitoring technologies create unique legal and ethical challenges. They can trigger reputational backlash. Ethical oversight and proportionality reviews are essential. Emerging high-risk data uses why some data types now carry disproportionate risk. Not all personal data is treated equally anymore. Regulators, courts, and consumers are rapidly converging on the idea that certain categories of data and certain uses of data are inherently high risk, regardless of consent or technical safeguards in place. Location data, biometrics, and monitoring technologies sit at the center of this shift. These data uses are increasingly framed not as routine personal data processing, but as surveillance, behavioral control, autonomy-reducing technologies. For executives, the issue is no longer, is this lawful, but is this defensible? Why high-risk usage is the new regulatory lens. Excuse me. Modern privacy regimes increasingly regulate how data is used, rather than just what is collected. High-risk data uses typically share four traits: continuous or passive collection, difficulty of meaningful opt-out, asymmetric power between collector and subject, potential for harm beyond the original purpose. This explains why some data use now attracts automatic scrutiny, mandatory assessments, or outright prohibitions. Location data, from convenience to surveillance. Why is location data different? Precise location data reveals daily routine, religious practices, medical visits, political activity, intimate relationships. It enables interference at a level of intimacy that exceeds most other data types. Regulators increasingly treat location data as sensitive by nature, even if it's not labeled as such in the statute. Regulator and enforcement direction. Location data is now central to enforcement actions against data brokers. FTC actions framing location misuse as unfair practice. State laws, restrictions on geolocation collecting and sharing. National security scrutiny when data flows cross-border. Consent alone is no longer viewed as sufficient when collection is continuous, hard to disable, not strictly necessary for core service delivery. Executive risk signal. If your business tracks users in the background, sells or shares location data, retains historical movement patterns, uses location for inference rather than function, you should assume regulatory litigation and reputational exposure. Biometrics. Irreversibility changes the risk equation. Biometric data, face, fingerprints, voice, gait, iris, etc., is persistent, non-revocable, often collected passively, increasingly used for identity and access decisions. Unlike passwords, biometric identifiers cannot be changed if compromised or misused. Legal and litigation landscape. Biometrics attract statutory damages, notable under state laws, strict notices and consent requirements, heightened enforcement interests, privacy rights of action. Even where consent exists, regulators assess necessity, proportionality, and alternatives that are less invasive. Executive risk signal. Biometric risks escalate sharply when used for employee monitoring, customer identification beyond authentication, emotional detection or behavioral inference, surveillance rather than security. The more biometric data is used to assess, rank, or infer rather than simply verify, the higher the risk. Keep that in mind. Monitoring technologies, the normalization of surveillance. What counts as monitoring today? Monitoring technologies now extend far beyond cameras. Workplace productivity tracking, keystroke logging, screen recording, behavior analytics, AI-based attention or sentiment analysis. Wearables and ITO sensors. These tools often operate continuously and invisibly. Why monitoring is under fire? Monitoring technologies raise concerns about power imbalance, especially in employment, chilling effects on behavior, function creep, psychological harm, discriminatory impact. Regulators increasingly question whether consent is meaningful in environments where refusal is not realistic. Executive risk signal. Monitoring becomes high risk when it's always on, subjects cannot reasonably opt out, outputs are used for discipline, evaluation, or termination. Data is retained beyond immediate operational need. AI models draw inference about mental state or intent. In these cases, organizations should expect scrutiny, even if technically lawful. So be aware of that. Convergence with AI and automated decision making. Yeah, we like to make sure we have a human in the middle, right? At least now. But high risk data types become exponentially riskier when combined with AI, profiling, predictive analytics, automated decision making. Regulators increasingly evaluate whether individuals understand how data is used, whether outcomes can be explained, whether bias or exclusion is amplified, and whether human oversight is meaningful. What regulators expect from mature organizations. Heightened risk assessment. High-risk uses require documented necessity analysis. Consideration of less intrusive alternatives. Explicit executive sign-off. A purpose discipline. Organizations must clearly articulate why this data is needed, why this method is chosen, why less invasive options were rejected. Short retention and strong controls. High-risk data should have minimal retention, restricted access, strong encryption, and limited reuse. Remember, governance, not just compliance. Regulators increasingly look for ethics review process, cross-functional oversight, evidence that leadership considered downstream impacts. Strategic executive takeaways. Some data uses now carry presumptive risk. You must justify them, not regulators. Excuse me. Consent is weakening as a shield, especially in surveillance-like contexts. Invasiveness matters as much as legality. Lawful does not mean defensible. High-risk data plus AI multiplies exposure. Technical sophistication increases scrutiny. And if you would struggle to explain the use publicly, expect regulatory concern. All right, we're here on the last slide. So key leadership questions. Is the organization compliant with applicable privacy laws and regulations? If not, where are the gaps and what is the plan to address them? Do we have the right people, processes, and tools to meet privacy obligations in every jurisdiction where our customers reside? Are privacy and cybersecurity governance aligned and integrated across the organization? Are they embedded into the culture, project life cycles, policies, and performance metrics? How are we staying vigilant in a rapid, evolving regulatory and threat environment? Effective privacy programs rely on measurable indicators to assess performance, manage risk, and demonstrate accountability. Key metrics often include data breach and incident rates to monitor security and exposure threats or trends, number of severities, response time, etc. Data subject request fulfillment times to measure responsiveness to individual rights, the volume, time to resolution. For example, privacy impact assessments and completion rates, right, to ensure risk is evaluated before new processing activities. Number completed rate, new project, etc. Training, participation, and completion rates to support awareness and accountability. Monitor employee training, completion, and general privacy knowledge. Consent captured and opt-out rates to measure transparency and user control effectiveness. Opt-in and opt-out rates, consent banner effectiveness is an example. Audit findings and remediation timelines to track governance, maturity, business values, quantify privacy's impact on deals, customer trust, and ROI. These metrics generally fall into several categories. Individual right metrics, access, deletion, correction, and opt-out requests. Measure response to the user request, access, deletion, or opt-out consent rates, and the satisfaction. Accountability metrics, PIAs, DPIAs, and audits, vendor assessments, right? So track completion of PIAs and DPIAs, the audit results, the incident response time, and third-party contract reviews. Policy and governance metrics, policy coverage, update cycles, and control implementation. Evaluate how well policies are implemented, like tracking data inventory or personal information management systems. Awareness and cultural metrics, training completion, privacy incidents reporting. Together, these indicators measure both activity, what the organization is doing, and effectiveness, how well controls are working. Tracking and reporting these metrics help build customer trust, demonstrate regulatory accountability, and show leadership the tangible value of privacy investments. And why they matter. Demonstrate compliance, prove adherence to laws like GDPR in the various states. Build trust, show customers their data is handled responsibly. Manage risk, proactively identify and manage privacy gaps. Drive strategy, securing budgets, improving processes, and showing value to leadership. Hey, thank you for watching this video. Please feel free to reach out to me, reach out to Executive Technology LLC. We're based in Florida and we work with everybody all around the globe. Thank you again and have a blessed day.